Libby Jamieson now, who is the Teleweb Manager of Switchboard Victoria, a statewide peer support service for the LGBTIQA+ community. She manages the QLAF phone and web chat peer support service and the after-hours service of With Respect, the Victorian-based specialist LGBTIQ family violence service. Prior to working at Switchboard, she was the Education and Training Coordinator at WIRE, Women's Information and Referral Service. She co-wrote the Access and Inclusion Policy for trans and gender diverse people.
Cool. Thanks, Libby.
Do I have to use a microphone?
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, yes, okay, yeah, no, sorry, that's an accessibility issue. I want to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, specifically the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded in this space, treaty has never been negotiated, and that we live and work and benefit from being on stolen land. Thank you. As Ash said, I work at Switchboard at the moment, but I'm here today to talk to you about the work that WIRE did in creating a transgender diverse policy, which took us 2 years to work on and finalise. And it was a group effort, and we talked to a lot of people. And I want to acknowledge, obviously I want to acknowledge WIRE, but also the Women's Circus, who, as far as we know here in Victoria, I'm not sure about Australia, did this work first. And the Women's Circus, 2015, 2016, did a lot of work with their members and created a policy that said Women's Circus welcomes any member who identifies as or has lived as a woman or identifies as non-binary. So we worked, did some work with them when we were creating our policy. And you might ask, why did we create the policy? I mean, I think that Rory and Sarah have really amazingly demonstrated why. But for us at WIRE, we created the policy because one of our service users experienced gender-based violence in the organisation, and unfortunately, as is often the case for change, that someone is harmed or someone loses their life before organisations act on structural change. So that was an incredibly upsetting event to take place, but we used that to catalyse change in the organisation. And I'm thinking of that person while I talk to you, and yes, we had righted some of that injustice and harm that was perpetrated on that person, and they're still involved in the organisation, which we're really happy about. So in the process of that event happening, we realised that as an organisation, we came to understand more about what the Federal Equal Opportunity Act said. So from the changes to the Act in 2013, we as an organisation were not aware of them, and so we acted in ignorance, and we rectified the situation. So we didn't change the definition of woman as such, but we expanded our eligibility criteria to be inclusive of transgender, diverse and non-binary people. And in doing that, we recognised that we've always had trans women involved in the organisation. So WIRE is 37 years old, so we've always had trans people involved in the organisation, but this policy was really explicitly putting it on the table and acknowledging that they've always been with us, and creating a policy that speaks to them and speaks to staff and other service users about how they can access service. And I think that in the process of doing that policy and it becoming public, and WIRE really changing the messaging that it has on its social media, that we getting more people who identify as transgender, diverse and non-binary across all facets of the organisation, which is really, really encouraging. So, I just want to talk to you about how we did it. And I don't know why that's happening.
Come forward a bit.
Forward? Yeah.
Yeah, just switch off the other microphone.
So how we went about that process was, I guess there's 4 points: consultation, training, education, a code of conduct and leadership. So we did a lot of consultation. We talked to people within the organisation, so our service users at Wire, we talked to staff, we talked to the board, and then we invited people from outside the organisation to come and consult with us. And we created a working group of the staff team to work on the policy. So that really was a really important thing for us to do, because we got a lot of buy-in from staff. And you know, as you can appreciate, some people on staff were, you know, not so sure about the policy and potentially didn't understand a lot around what it means to be transgender, gender diverse and non-binary. So it was a really a process of education for everybody as well. So we had a working group that worked on that. We reported to staff meetings, and I like to think that we kept people up to date around the process or the progress that we were making along the way. And then we invited comment from the trans and gender diverse organisations that we knew of. So we spoke with the training team at Transgender Victoria. We consulted extensively with Star Lady from Zoe Bell Gender Centre. We had conversations with people who were at GASP in Geelong. We talked to people from Gender. So when we started writing the policy, they looked at it with us all the way through. And so we got sign-off from board, we got sign-off from the CEO, but we also got sign-off from them. Is this something that's going to work? Have we covered off everybody that we need to consider? And all of these things were happening at the same time. So the training and education that we did were happening as we were doing that consultation. So you can appreciate that you know, you might say, no, we've just got to train everyone first and then we'll announce the policy or we'll launch the policy. But we felt like we already had trans people, non-binary people in the organisation. They were already there. It wasn't like we were going to, you know, at some point push a button and they'd start coming through the door. That we needed to do all of this work in tandem together. So we kind of juggled a whole heap of things. We trained, we offered training to staff. We introduced a new module in the Wire Helpline training course, which invited trans and gender diverse people to come into the course and speak about feminism and speak about their takes on feminism and how we can work together as allies. And so that included people presenting about their lives, and there was also reading material there as well. Staff were trained, and we offered an information session to people, service users, so people who accessed our walk-in centre. And that was a really interesting process to go through. We talked about you know, what we were planning to do and put it to our clients, if you were our service users. Why I call them service users. And then we amended our code of conduct, which was really important. So the code of conduct stated that homophobia, transphobia, biphobia would not be tolerated. And we worked with staff to provide them with support to remove people who couldn't respect that code of conduct. And so that wasn't that's it, you're banned for life. It was an opportunity to have some support from a staff member to talk about what's going on for that person, and to ask them to, you know, be respectful in the space. And if they weren't able to do that, they were, you know, asked to leave for a period of time, and then, you know, invited to come back at another time and, talk about staff reconsider their thoughts. So it's not like we ever denied anyone access to the service, we just offered them a timeout, I suppose, if you want. That code of conduct is really important, and you will all have codes of conduct in your organisations that everyone's expected to adhere to. And I think that's something that you need to reference all of the time when you're talking about creating new policies. But I think the thing that I'm most convinced about in the way that we created the policy was the leadership of the organisation. And I acknowledge Julie Kuhn as the CEO of WISE in the room today, and also my former colleague Jessica, who was involved in the working group to create the policy. So Julie as the CEO and the staff team, in recognising that harm had been done, set about to transform the organisation and to redress that harm. And we could not have done that without Julie's leadership, and we could not have done that without the board of WIRE being supportive. And so in one of those training courses that were delivered, that Star Lady from Zoe Bell delivered, actually the chair of the board was there. So there was that buy-in from the very top, and that's the only way that this policy worked. And I know that you will know this as well, if any of you are involved in Rainbow Tick for your organisations. The only way that this change happens is if leadership stands up and says that this is really important. And the board of WIRE and the CEO, Julie, stand by that policy, and so they use the code of conduct as a way of having conversations with people who are still not understanding how the policy works. There is still graffiti happening in the toilets around the policy that's happening. But I mean, I think that Julie would say herself that that's an opportunity for a conversation. And that one of the things that I was most impressed about the leadership in the organisation was that there was a time where there was some anti-trans graffiti happening in the toilets, and Julie walked out into the middle of the walk-in centre where service users are spending time, and spoke to the room and said, we have a code of conduct in this organisation, this code of conduct has been breached, this behaviour won't be tolerated. If you'd like to come and talk about what's going, presuming that that person was in the room, come and talk about what's going on with you, my door's always open, but know that we will not resile from this code of conduct. And that leadership is really what's kept that policy in place, and it has maintained a safer place. It's not completely safe, no space can be, but has maintained a safer space for those people accessing service. And that's kind of how the policy goes, and it doesn't stop. You know that when you create a policy, it's a living document, and you have to pay attention to it all the time. And I've noticed since I've left the organisation that the way the trans and gender diverse policy has been incorporated into the whole of the organisation is really evident by the social media and what's on the website. So that is an organisation that has really taken that policy to heart, and I feel like is working really well. And so that's a really positive message for us to think about. And I guess one of the things that the questions that have come up for me, and I acknowledge that some of this language is out of date, but I'm referencing a particular theorist called Connie Burke, who asks us questions about exclusivity and inclusivity. And one of the things around gender-based violence for me is how can we talk about same-sex family violence? This is not something that we do very well. How can we talk about women who use power over other women? The binary notions of who uses and who experiences violence invisibilises so many of us, and that's really something that we have to come to grips with. And Connie Burke also asked this question, can we see a movement towards expanding who we are working with and who is working with us, rather than staying with exemptions and exceptions? And I think one of the things that I saw at Wire was the expansion and of people who came to access our service. And yes, there were probably some people who were upset about the decision that was made, but overwhelmingly, we've got growth in the organisation, we've got trust in the organisation, and really that's what the service is all about. It's really important. And we know that the notions of liberation theory are, if you make your service accessible and inclusive to people on the margins, everyone gets better. Your service and people's lives are improved if you acknowledge and be inclusive of people on the margins. And I guess another question which speaks to what Sarah and Rory talked about is, how can feminist organisations who claim to be feminist, or how can family violence organisations that claim to be feminist and yet breach people's human rights about deciding who isn't and isn't a woman by how she looks, and indeed how she sounds in a phone call? We know that current structures benefit people who are using violence. They know how to use the system against the people they're controlling. And again, I want to acknowledge Star Lady from Zoe Bell Gender Centre, who really talked me through that idea. Star Lady was really pivotal to us at Wire in making this policy a reality. And put up with a lot of stupid questions from me and thoughtless comments. So she's not here at the moment, but you know, I've told her that to her face. So I think I know that we're running late, but I think these are some questions that you might want to think about if you're going to go down this path in your organisations. It's like, do you know what your eligibility criteria are? Who are the allies in your workplace? Who are you going to get to come and do this work with you? Who in leadership is going to support the expansion of your eligibility criteria? Yeah. What does your code of conduct say at the moment? And how is it used in the organisation? How is it adhered to? And who will you consult with amongst the transgender, diverse, non-binary organisations? There is also a cost involved to doing this kind of work. Why paid me to do this work outside of the role that I had there at the organisation. We paid for the training that was delivered in the organisation. So that's something to think about as well. This stuff costs money. Who are you going to pay to work on the policy? Will you be paying for education and training? Will you be acknowledging and paying the trans and gender diverse non-binary people who are already accessing your service for their expertise? That's a really important question. Also acknowledging safe spaces in the organisation. What have you got? Gender neutral toilets. Your reception area, does that look like a safe and inviting space for people when they come into your organisation? And Zorobel's posters that are over there are fantastic, really bright, amazing posters for you to put up. I know that people talk about the concept of tokenism around rainbow flags and all of that kind of stuff, but we all know that when an LGBTIQA+ person, transgender, diverse, non-binary person walks into your organisation, they're scanning the room for safety. And they're looking for visual representations of themselves. And sometimes that's a rainbow flag. Or it's, you know, a poster around non-binary people are great, or some of us use they, them pronouns, etc. They're looking for that, for safety. And your reception staff, as the face of your and voice of your organisations, are so important in this conversation because they set the tone for people. So I guess if you're thinking about developing a policy for your organisation, there's some questions for you and wondering about what you will do first. But knowing that we made mistakes along the way. The first iteration of the policy, we jumped and we listened a lot. And the trans and gender diverse people that we worked with were very patient with us, and we really wanted to get it right. It took 2 years. Arguably, we could look at the policy now and go, oh my God, it needs a bit of work. These are living documents that need to be tended to, but they're really important. That's it. I talk really fast. I'm happy to share this. If you want to access to the PowerPoint, there's probably a couple of notes I need to take out of it. But I want to acknowledge these references. So Zobel Gender Centre, Transgender Victoria, Why Gender, the thinking of Connie Burke, Rethinking a Movement, is really interesting. The Australian Trans and Gender Diverse Sexual Health Survey that Rory and Sarah talked about is a really disturbing document about the experiences that trans and gender, the sexual assault experiences of trans and gender diverse people. Also, obviously, the Wire website, the Women's Circus website, and just a couple of really quick plugs about Switchboard. We've got 2 helplines. We've got an out and about community visitors scheme for older people over the age of 55. But also, I just want to tell you about next week we're launching a podcast around Let's Talk About Suicide with Joy Melbourne and Jesuit Social Services Support After Suicide. It's happening at the Wheeler Centre. We know that suicide is our communities experience suicide at an incredibly high rate, and we know that it's a feature of family violence for our communities, that they connected young people's experiences of family violence and people's experiences of intimate partner violence, and our suicide rates are connected. So that's part of the conversation that we're having with the community. I'm going to leave you with Leslie Feinberg, who's an absolute inspiration to me. Leslie Feinberg wrote the book Stonebutch Blues. If you've not read it, I'd encourage you to. So people of all sexes have the right to explore femininity, masculinity, and the infinite variations between without criticism or ridicule. Thanks very much.